I still remember that electrifying moment as if it were splashed in neon across my mind. The moment when I realized that my wife's dream home, the one we had both longed for and painstakingly saved for, was not truly ours. In the first 100 heartbeats of that realization, every hope of a secure future and every whispered promise we once shared was shattered by the cold, painful truth. She had put the deed in her name, effectively claiming the home as hers. And when I discovered that, driven by a mix of betrayal and an unyielding resolve, I secretly sold it without her knowing, I knew that everything was about to change. That single, life-altering act was not born out of revenge, but out of the desperate need to reclaim control over my future. A future that I had once believed was a shared dream but now belonged solely to me. It all started years ago when we first decided to buy a home. I remember the endless nights we spent poring over listings and the shared excitement as we imagined our future there. The house we chose was more than just walls and a roof. It was a symbol of our love, our ambitions, and the promise of a life built together. I worked tirelessly, saving every extra penny and sacrificing moments of leisure to ensure that our dream could become a reality. Every dollar in our joint account was a step toward that future. But as the years went by, subtle cracks began to appear in our relationship. What had once been a partnership built on trust and mutual aspiration gradually turned into a battlefield of silent resentments and unspoken discontents. My wife, once my confidant and equal partner, began to change. I noticed a growing distance between us, a quiet withdrawal that I initially brushed off as stress from her job or other trivial matters. Yet, in hindsight, those were the early signs of a shift in her priorities. I was so focused on providing and building a future together that I missed the subtle hints. The furtive phone calls, the late nights when she would slip out without a word, the way her eyes would wander as if searching for something I couldn't offer. I trusted her implicitly, believing that our shared dream was unassailable. We even decided together that the house would be in her name, a decision we rationalized as a gesture of her long-held ambition and the one thing she'd always desired. In our minds, it was a symbol of her success, a legacy that we would both cherish. But the decision, made with little discussion, planted a seed of imbalance in our relationship. As the years passed, I began to feel increasingly sidelined. My contributions to our savings and the long hours I dedicated to our joint future were quietly overshadowed by her newfound assertion of ownership. It wasn't that I resented her desire to have the house in her name, it was the way it came to symbolize a larger truth, that the life we'd planned together was not as united as I had always believed. And then one day the final blow arrived. I returned home from work expecting the usual hum of domestic routine, only to find the house unnervingly quiet. The living room was bathed in the soft glow of evening light, but there was no warmth, no laughter, only an oppressive stillness that hinted at something being terribly amiss. As I walked through the hall, a misplaced envelope caught my eye. On the front, in bold, unyielding letters, was a divorce notice, sealed and unsigned. My heart hammered in my chest as I tried to process the sudden, brutal clarity of what it meant. In that moment, every memory of shared dreams and whispered promises crumbled into dust. The home, which was once a beacon of our future, now stood as a monument to betrayal. 4 days after that night, I was consumed by a whirlwind of emotions. I spent countless hours pacing through the empty halls, grappling with disbelief, sorrow, and a seething anger that I could barely contain. I replayed every conversation, every moment of silence that now seemed to speak volumes of the disintegration of our bond. In my solitude, I began to question everything, my own worth, our shared decisions, and the very nature of the dreams we had built. I wondered if I had been so blinded by hope that I had ignored the early signs of her disillusionment. The shock was overwhelming, but amid the despair, a quiet determination began to emerge. That determination drove me to dig deeper into the events that had led us here. I reread old emails and text messages, revisited bank statements that chronicled our sacrifices, and slowly pieced together a timeline of events that had subtly indicated her growing distance. It became painfully clear that the decision to place the home in her name was not just about fulfilling her dream, it was a move that signaled her desire for autonomy, even if it meant severing the financial ties that we had both labored to create. The truth was a bitter pill to swallow, yet it also steeled my resolve. I realized that if she had chosen to claim our future as solely hers, then I must reclaim mine. I could no longer allow my contributions, years of hard work, sleepless nights, and quiet sacrifices, to be swept aside without consequence. That night, in the dead of darkness, I sat at my old wooden desk and opened a blank journal. With trembling hands, I began to write, pouring out every raw, unfiltered emotion that churned within me. I wrote about the sense of abandonment, the shock of reading that divorce notice, and the bitter realization that the home we had once dreamed of was now a symbol of a partnership that had disintegrated into selfish ambitions. I recounted every sacrifice, every moment when I had chosen our shared future over my own dreams, and I vowed that I would never let my worth be diminished again. Each word on that page was a step toward reclaiming my identity, a promise to myself that I would rebuild a future that honored my sacrifices and celebrated my resilience. In the quiet hours that followed, I resolved that I would take matters into my own hands. I recalled, with a mix of pain and grim satisfaction, that I had secretly cashed out my share of our retirement savings long before her impulsive actions. That decision, made in a moment of forethought and caution, was now my lifeline, a safeguard against the ruin she had brought upon our shared future. With those funds secure, I began to formulate a plan not of vengeance, but of liberation. I would sell the home, my wife's dream home that she had so arrogantly claimed, and use the proceeds to secure my own future. The idea was as bold as it was necessary, to take back what had been lost, to erase the symbol of our broken promises, and to rebuild a life where my worth was recognized, not diminished. As I lay awake that night, the silence of the empty house around me felt both oppressive and oddly liberating. I was filled with a cocktail of emotions, a deep sadness for the life we had once planned together, an anger that burned with the intensity of betrayal, and a spark of hope that whispered of a future redefined on my own terms. I knew that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, emotional battles, legal complexities, and the daunting task of rebuilding everything from scratch. But in that moment, with the divorce notice clutched in my trembling hand, I made a silent promise. I would choose myself. I would reclaim every dream that had been crushed, and I would forge a new path, unburdened by the weight of her deceit. That promise, made in the quiet aftermath of heartbreak, became the foundation of my new journey, a journey that would take me deep into the realms of self-discovery, financial independence, and personal empowerment. I realized that the betrayal was not the end, but the beginning of a transformation that would redefine who I was and what I was capable of achieving. The home, once a symbol of our shared dreams, would now become the catalyst for my liberation, a tangible reminder that even when someone you love shatters your world, you have the power to rebuild it into something even more magnificent than you ever imagined. That morning, as the pale light of dawn crept through the window of my empty house, I knew that my life had irrevocably changed. Standing in the silence of rooms that once echoed with laughter and shared dreams, I felt an overwhelming mix of sorrow, liberation, and quiet resolve. The divorce notice lay on the kitchen table like a cold declaration of an ending I had both dreaded and, in a strange way, anticipated. In that moment, every promise, every hope for our future together dissolved into bittersweet clarity. I had chosen myself, my own worth, my own future, and now, as I prepared to step forward into an uncertain yet exhilarating new life, I vowed never to allow anyone else's betrayal to define me again. The days following that fateful morning were a blend of introspection and decisive action. I spent long hours reflecting on the life I had built with her, trying to pinpoint where the cracks had formed. I pored over old photographs, revisited memories of happier times, and even reread the love letters that once warmed my heart. Each artifact was a reminder of what I had lost, yet also a spark that ignited the inner strength I had been neglecting for far too long. I realized that while the emptiness of that home was a painful symbol of our failed union, it also presented me with an unparalleled opportunity, the chance to rebuild every part of my identity on my own terms. I began by taking control of my surroundings. With a sense of grim determination, I made arrangements to secure my personal finances. I met with financial advisors, legal experts, and real estate professionals to ensure that every step I took would protect the future I was determined to create. I reallocated the funds I had secretly safeguarded, setting aside a portion for new investments and another for a modest home, a personal sanctuary that would no longer be tainted by memories of betrayal. Every meeting, every calculation reinforced the fact that I was no longer at the mercy of circumstances. I was the architect of my own destiny. At work, my transformation manifested in every decision I made. I threw myself into my projects with a relentless energy that surprised even me. The humiliation of that evening, when I left an empty house behind, had fueled a drive to prove my worth, not to anyone else but to myself. I took on challenging assignments, sought new clients, and even initiated innovative projects that had long been sidelined by the inertia of our shared routine. With each success, I felt the sting of past hurts recede, replaced by a deep-seated confidence in my own abilities. My colleagues began to see me not as someone diminished by a broken relationship, but as a leader whose insights and creativity were indispensable. Every praise, every nod of approval, was a brick in the new foundation of my self-respect. Even as my professional life flourished, I knew the journey inward was equally crucial. I sought therapy to untangle the raw emotions of betrayal and abandonment that had threatened to overwhelm me. In those sessions, I learned to face the pain without letting it dictate my future. I discovered that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting the past or excusing her actions. It was about freeing myself from the endless cycle of bitterness and self-doubt. With time, the intense emotions softened into a steady resolve. I learned to cherish the lessons hidden within each painful memory, recognizing that every tear had watered the seeds of my personal growth. In the midst of this period of reinvention, I also reconnected with parts of myself that I had long neglected. I returned to my old hobbies, picking up the guitar again, losing myself in the gentle strum of familiar chords that once soothed my spirit. I took up painting, allowing vivid colors to flow onto blank canvases, each brushstroke a defiant celebration of my renewed inner life. I started a blog where I poured out my experiences, the raw shock of that empty house, the crushing weight of the divorce notice, and the gradual, painful yet hopeful journey toward reclaiming my identity. The response was overwhelming. Strangers and old friends alike reached out, sharing their own stories of heartache and rebirth, affirming that even in our darkest moments, there is the potential for transformation. Socially, I began to rebuild my world, forging new relationships and mending old ones. I sought out genuine connections with people who valued authenticity over pretense. I met at small gatherings, intimate dinners, and quiet cafes, where conversations flowed deeply and hearts were laid bare without judgment. I discovered that true friendship is not defined by shared history alone, but by the mutual respect and support that grow when people truly listen to one another. In these circles, I found solace and strength, realizing that my journey was not one I had to endure in isolation. The warmth of these relationships slowly healed the wound of betrayal, replacing isolation with a sense of belonging and reaffirming that my worth was recognized by those who cared for me. As the seasons shifted from the cold grasp of winter to the tentative light of spring, a palpable transformation began to manifest in every facet of my life. My professional endeavors continued to flourish, new projects were launched, innovative ideas took root, and my reputation as a resilient, creative leader solidified. With every contract secured and every investor call that ended with encouraging words, I built an empire of self-made success. I no longer measured my value by the shallow judgments of those who once looked down on me, but by the tangible results of my hard work and unwavering determination. I also redefined what personal fulfillment meant. I set ambitious goals for both my career and my personal life, goals that were not remnants of a shared dream, but declarations of my individuality. I planned to travel, to explore new cultures and perspectives that would broaden my understanding of the world, and to invest in creative projects that allowed me to express the full spectrum of my experiences. I even began to consider mentoring young professionals, sharing the lessons I had learned from my journey in hopes of inspiring others to rise above their own betrayals. Every new goal, every bold step forward, was a proclamation that my destiny was mine to shape, a future that was built on my own terms, free from the ghosts of a broken past. One particularly poignant afternoon, I sat on the porch of my modest new home, a home that I had purchased with the funds I had meticulously secured, and reflected on the winding path that had brought me here. The gentle breeze carried the scent of blossoming flowers, and the soft murmur of life in the neighborhood filled me with a quiet optimism. In that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the journey. Every tear, every sleepless night, every painful revelation had forged within me an unyielding resilience that now defined my existence. I realized that while the memory of that empty house and the divorce notice would always linger like a bittersweet shadow, they were no longer chains that bound me to the past. Instead, they were the crucible in which my new self had been molded, a testament to the fact that from the deepest betrayals, a stronger, wiser, and more independent spirit can emerge. I began to see my future as a tapestry of endless possibility. I envisioned long, fulfilling days where I would wake up with purpose, engage in work that excited me, and spend evenings in the company of friends who celebrated my true self. I planned to reinvest in my passions, to continue growing my professional ventures, and to explore new avenues that challenged me to think bigger. The scars of my past had transformed into symbols of my strength, a visual reminder that I had not only survived the worst but had also emerged ready to thrive. I embraced every opportunity to learn, to connect, and to build a life that resonated with authenticity and purpose. In the final liberating stretch of my transformation, I began to share my story publicly, speaking at local events, writing articles for community newsletters, and even engaging with a wider audience on social media. I recounted the devastating moment when I returned home to find an empty house and a divorce notice, and how that shocking revelation had been the catalyst for a profound personal renaissance. I talked about the pain of betrayal and the long, arduous process of rebuilding my identity, and I shared the hard-earned lessons of resilience and self-reclamation. The response was overwhelmingly positive. People reached out with messages of encouragement, sharing their own experiences of loss and renewal, and reaffirming that my journey was a powerful testament to the human spirit's ability to rise from the ashes. Now, as I stand at the threshold of a new era, one defined by independence, self-respect, and an unshakable belief in my own worth, I feel a deep, abiding peace. The painful memories of that fateful evening, once a source of paralyzing despair, have become stepping stones on my path to a future that I am proud to call my own. I have reclaimed my identity, rebuilt my financial security, and forged deep, meaningful relationships that remind me daily of the strength that resides within me. I have transformed every bitter tear and every painful scar into a symbol of my resilience, a silent, powerful declaration that no matter how devastating the betrayal, I have the power to rise, to rebuild, and to create a life of limitless possibility. This is my story, a journey from heartbreak to empowerment, from betrayal to the triumphant reclamation of my own destiny. Every step, every struggle, and every victory along the way has shaped me into the man I am today, a man who chooses himself, who cherishes his independence, and who will never again allow someone else's shallow judgments to define his worth. As I step boldly into tomorrow, I do so with a heart full of gratitude for the lessons learned, a mind sharpened by every challenge overcome, and an unyielding conviction that my future is mine to create, one courageous, determined step at a time.